Hey there, I'm Jonathan with Getting Games, and today I'll be teaching you Finspan while we play through the first out of 4 rounds. Now, if you have thoughts about this game while you're watching this, then please leave a comment down below, and let's just jump right into the game. Out here, we have the game fully set up and ready to play for our 3 different players. Let's start things off with a brief overview of the game. In it, each player is a marine researcher, and we are seeking to find and observe an array of aquatic life in the colorful sunlit zone, ghostly twilight zone, and pitch black midnight zone in the world's oceans and seas. Now, the game takes place over 4 weeks, and within each week, every player is going to use all 6 of their divers to either find new fish, which can then be placed into their associated zone. For example, this sargassum fish can only go into a sunlit area. And when you find these fish and place them down, you do have to pay the cost in the top left corner, which is frequently discarding other cards from our face-up hands. Now, the other thing our divers can do is dive down in one of these columns, activating various fish along the way, as well as gaining board-based benefits, as long as there's at least one fish already found in that specific zone as the diver goes down. These divers always make it to the very bottom of those columns, potentially gaining benefits as they descend. Once everyone has used all 6 of their divers, we will score for the week. As you can see, there are various conditions that are activated at the end of each week. And once we finish 4 weeks, we'll move into endgame scoring, where we'll score points for the fish that we found, as well as eggs, young fish, schools of fish, and also consumed fish. And then the player with the most points will win the game. Now, that was a high-level overview of the game, and I will explain how all of these details work while we're playing. And on that note, let's now start the game. For today's tutorial, we are going to play as the pink player, and because we have the starting player token, that means we can perform the first turn in the first week of the game. So let's focus over here at the top of our ocean board. Now, we have 6 divers, and on our turn, we have to take one of these divers and either place them up here to find a new fish from our hand, placing them down onto our board, or we could place them above one of these columns and have them dive down, gaining us benefits as they go. We're going to start the game by finding a fish. And the way this works is we choose one fish from our hand, we pay the indicated cost in the top left corner, and then place it out onto our board. Now, you may have noticed that our hands of fish are face up. We place them next to our boards on the table so we can see everyone's hand of fish cards. And for this first turn of the game, I think let's find the porkfish. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at this card. We can see in the top left corner, the cost to play this fish is removing 1 egg from our board. To do that, let's focus out, and as you can see on our board, we all begin with 3 pre-printed fish in these columns, and these are specifically called forage fish. 2 of these forage fish begin the game with an egg, so we can spend one of these eggs, discarding it back to the supply, to pay for finding this porkfish, and I think we'll pay this egg, removing it from the board, and now we can find this porkfish. Now, every fish has specific zones that they can be found in. For the porkfish, they can only be found in the sunlit zone. When we look at our board, the sunlit zone is over here with the sun icon. Then there is a twilight zone here, and then finally a midnight zone as we look deeper underwater. So let's focus up here at the sunlit zone, and whenever we find a fish, we either place it into a valid empty spot, or we could place it on top of a previous fish, and that does include these foraging fish. Now, we can only do this if the newly found fish is longer than the fish that is being covered up. In this case, the Catalina goby is 1 centimeter, and this porkfish is 40 centimeters. 40 is a lot bigger than 1, so the porkfish could be played on top, and that consumes the fish that was just covered, including the fish that are printed on the board. The consumed fish have no effects for the rest of the game, but they are all worth 1 point when the game is over. Now, this porkfish is big enough to cover that Catalina goby, but we're not actually allowed to place it over there. The reason for that is because when we look at the right side of the card, we see this purple line, and that matches up with this line in the middle column of our board. Whenever a fish shows this on the right side, that means we must place that fish into the indicated column. Many fish in the game don't have that restriction. For example, this Patagonia toothfish could go into any of these columns. So we have to place the porkfish into one of these 3 positions, and I think we'll place it here. Now, there was a young token there already, and whenever there is a young token, a school token, as well as potentially an egg token on a space where a fish is found, you simply place those on top of the fish that was just found. In this case, of course, there is just the young token that was put there during setup. Let's focus in a little bit more because I do want to point out this 2 and a wave icon on the left side. The wave icon is victory points, so that means this porkfish is worth 2 victory points at the end of the game as long as it is still at the top of this position. If another fish comes along and consumes the porkfish, well, in that case, these tokens would go on top, and then of course, the porkfish as a consumed fish is just worth 1 point at the end of the game. Now, you may have noticed this brown when activated area on the card, and I'll explain that in detail when we dive, and I'll be getting to that soon. Well, we finished finding this porkfish, and that means our turn is done. So we move clockwise, and now the teal player gets to go. Just like we did, they're going to start by finding a fish, and from their initial hand of cards, they want to find this orange roughy. In the top left corner, we could see the cost for this is 2 cards. Now that means they have to discard 2 other cards from their hand. They've decided to discard this large tooth flounder as well as this bearded sea devil. Now these discarded cards go into a player-specific discard pile. Put that angled to the side over on the right side of your board to keep it separate from your hand. Now these discards are open information for all players, and there are ways to get these cards back into our hand, and I'll be explaining that very soon. Okay, teal is finished paying the cost to find this orange roughy. This is a 75 centimeter fish, it's pretty big, so they could place it here that would consume the showy bristlemouth, but they've decided they want to keep that face up for the moment, and they'll find the orange roughy down here in the midnight zone. Now let's focus on the right side of the card, because unlike the fish that we found that has an if activated effect, the orange roughy has a when played effect. So this only happens as this fish is placed down, and they will gain all of these benefits in any order of their choice. Now, as you can see, this is a blue icon that matches the blue icon in the top left. Whenever the icon is a cost, that means you have to discard cards from your hand. But if that icon is on the right, it is a benefit, and these are cards that are drawn randomly from the top of the deck. So the teal player will draw 3 random cards from the deck, which are then added into their hand. And then this last effect shows a card with a fish skeleton. This lets them look through their entire discard pile and choose 1 card from it and put it back into their hand. If, when activating this, there are no cards in your discard pile, then you can simply draw 1 card from the top of the deck. So teal can choose 1 of these to bring back into their hand, and they'll bring the bearded sea devil back. So this large tooth flounder stays in their discard pile. And that's going to finish their action. They have 1 more card in their hand than they had at the beginning of their turn. Before moving on, teal decides they're going to slightly change their placement. They'll put the orange roughy into this green column instead of the purple one. All right, teal is done with their turn, which means the gold player gets to go. And just like the rest of us, they are going to play a fish card from their hand. The one they've decided to go with is the blunt nose 6-gill shark. Now the cost for this one is going to be 1 young, and they must consume another fish. Young tokens look like this. They only have 1 on their board, so they must discard that. And it is worth noting, every young and egg token on your board at the end of the game is worth 1 point. So that is 1 point lost, but it's also an 8-point fish that they are finding. Now the other cost, again, is consuming. Now we've already explained consuming before. It is an option when you place a fish down, where you put that new fish on top of a previous fish as long as the new one is larger. Whenever this icon shows up, that means consuming is mandatory, and they've decided to consume this showy bristlemouth. The showy bristlemouth is 3 centimeters, and this blunt nose 6-gill shark is 550 centimeters, so significantly bigger. They'll place this there, which satisfies the consuming cost to play it. And now let's focus on this card a little more. First of all, I didn't point out, but this shark can be found in the sunlight, twilight, or midnight sections of the board. Obviously, the gold player went with twilight. And then on the right side, there's a when played effect, but it affects all players. So we all get this benefit here, and I do want to point out up there, these 2 shark teeth. Now, this means this is a predator. Having just 1 shark tooth icon would indicate that. And if there are 2 of these icons, that means this is an uber predator, and all uber predators have a when played effect that applies to all players. In this case, the blunt nose 6-gill shark says that all players can put 1 egg on top of every fish within their purple column on the board. We can see the gold player only has one fish in their purple column, so they can put an egg on top of it because that fish does not have an egg already. There is a hard limit of a single egg on every fish, so that means in the future, if they go to gain an egg, they cannot place it onto this blunt-nosed six-gill shark because there's an egg there already. If they had other fish in this purple column that did not have eggs yet, they would gain one, but they just get this one here. And when we look to us, this is actually pretty great for us. The gold player did get a very lucrative fish down, but for us, our porkfish and our showy bristlemouth don't have eggs. They're both in our purple column, so that means we'll gain an egg for each of them. And then finally, the teal player has just one fish that does not have an egg in that purple column. They decided not to put the orange roughy there. They're kind of regretting it now, but that's the way it is. Well, gold is done with their turn, so we now get to take our second turn of the week. I think let's play another fish, and the gold player really helped us out. That's because I want to play this Patagonian toothfish, and it costs 3 eggs, and we have 3 eggs. We got 2 of them on the gold player's turn. So we could remove these back to the supply, and this toothfish can be found in any zone on the board. I think let's put it here in the blue column within our sunlight zone. And then we get a bunch of stuff when played. The first thing is a random card from the top of the deck. It's a swordfish. Then we'll gain 1 egg. That can be placed onto any of our fish that does not have an egg already. We'll go with the showy bristlemouth here. And then this effect lets us hatch 1 egg into a young. Well, we only have 1 egg. It's this one we just put down, so it will hatch. Now for the final benefit that we gain, we can move one of our fish or one of our schools of fish. And when moving, they could go any number of spaces up, down, left, or right of their current position. Let's have this young move down here. There can be multiple young on a fish, and that completes the move. Now, before we move on, though, I'd like to talk a little bit about schools of fish. Now, the moment there are 3 young on a fish position, they are immediately discarded and replaced with a school token. As I mentioned, this move could be 1 young or 1 school, and when you move these schools of fish, just like the young, they can go any number of spaces, but they cannot move onto or through a position that already has a school. For example, this school could not move up there or beyond that position. Now, the reason schools are important is because, as I said, every young is worth 1 point at the end of the game, but every school is worth 6 points. Now, it takes 3 young to make a school, so that's effectively 3 points worth of tokens, turning into 6 points worth of tokens. Also, there are some fish out there that require spending a school from your board in order to play them out. Now, I did mention that as soon as there are 3 young, we make a school, but the exception to that is that there can be only 1 school on a spot. So in this case, we'd leave the 3 young there, but if we moved that school away, these 3 would instantly become a school. Also, if you have a situation where there are 2 young, and then you move another young onto that position, you can't keep going. The moment this enters here, they turn into a school. Now, that's not quite the case just yet. We have 2 young on this showy bristlemouth, and our turn is done. This means teal can go, and they've decided to play another fish from their hand. They are going to find this white-banded tigerfish. It has to be played into the sunlight zone, and the cost is just 1 card discarded from their hand. They're going to discard this tripod fish. I do want to briefly point out that this has a gold section on the right side. If this was face up on their board at the end of the game, this would happen before scoring. In that case, they could consume a couple of cards. When you consume a card with an effect like this, you simply take a card from your hand and you tuck it underneath a fish that you've already played. In this case, though, they are discarding this tripod fish, and then they'll play this white-banded triggerfish here. As you can see, it does have a blue band on the right side, which means it must go into this blue column. Now, that has an if-activated effect, specifically letting them draw a card from their discard pile, but they only get this when a diver goes down here, and that hasn't happened just yet. Okay, that finishes a quick turn for them. Teal is done with their turn, which means the gold player gets to go, and they've decided, just like the rest of us, to play another fish. They're going to go with the pygmy seahorse. That just costs them 1 card from their hand, and I think they're going to discard this blue streak cleaner wrasse. The seahorse has to go into the sunlit zone, and it has to go into the green column. They're going to put it here. Technically, they could consume that Catalina goby. This is a 2 centimeter fish, and the Catalina goby is a 1 centimeter, but they want to leave it face up for the moment. Before we move on, I want to briefly note this tag to the right of the seahorse name. This is camouflage. That means this fish has developed a means to hide and blend in with objects in their surroundings to protect themselves. Now, this doesn't have a mechanical effect on how this fish works, but there are occasional things that interact with tags, and I'll talk about that later on. All right, gold is done, which means we get to go, and we could find another fish, but I think instead, let's dive. When we do this, we take one of our diver tokens, and we choose one of the 3 columns, and I think we'll go for the middle purple column here. Now let's dive down this column, gaining effects as we go. The first thing to note is the zone effects. This says we gain 1 egg as long as there is at least 1 fish within this zone of the column. The pork fish was placed there, which means this activates and it gets us 1 egg. If we had not played the pork fish here, there'd be no fish in that sunlit zone and we would not get this effect. That's the main reason I put the pork fish here. So we gain 1 egg and we place it onto any of our fish that does not have an egg yet. And let's go with the showy bristlemouth. That way, if we're able to hatch this later on, we'll immediately get 1 school. After getting that, the diver is going to head down and stop at every fish that has an if activated effect. In this case, the pork fish says we gain an egg. Now that can't go onto the showy bristlemouth, only 1 egg can go on each fish, but we can put it up here on the Patagonian toothfish, and I think that's what we'll do. Then our diver will keep heading down, and now when they hit the twilight zone, we can once again see this effect will activate if there's at least 1 fish here. Now that's always going to be the case because we start with a foraging fish in this position, so that will get us an egg, and let's place it there, and then continue descending. Our diver has reached the midnight zone, and we do not have any fish here, which means we don't get this effect. Now the diver reaches the very bottom, and at this point, if this is the first time we've had a diver reach this section within a week, we put the diver over there and gain this effect, and then cover it up. This is an egg, so we gain 1 more egg, and then we leave the diver here. That means if later on this week we dive down this column again, when we reach this position, we'll simply leave the diver in this section, gaining us no benefit for reaching the very bottom. We do get an egg right now, though, so we'll put this here, and that was a 4 egg descent for our diver. Not bad for our turn, and it looks like we're done. This means the teal player can go. They've decided they are going to dive as well. They're going to head down their blue column. In the sunlit area, we can see they do have at least 1 fish, so that lets them draw a random card from the top of the deck. That's a giant devil ray. Then they'll keep heading down, and the white banded triggerfish says when it's activated, they can take 1 card from their discard and add it back into their hand. They'll go with this tripod fish, and then continue to head down. Here, they do not get that effect because there's not at least 1 fish, but down in the midnight section, they do have at least 1 fish. That's always going to be the case because the glasshead grenadier is printed on the board. This lets them draw another random card from the deck, and then finally, when they reach the bottom, this effect says the first time they dive in this column each week, they can take a card from their discard pile. They only have 1 card left, so that goes into their hand, which is now gigantic, and their turn is done. This means the gold player can go, and they feel like diving as well, and they'll go with the other column we haven't seen just yet, the green one on the right side. In the sunlight zone, as long as they have at least 1 fish, they can do a hatch action. They have 2 fish, actually. They've decided to hatch here. That's going to be this egg turning into a young. And then as they descend, they reach the pygmy seahorse. And if that is activated, they can hatch. Well, this egg right here can be hatched, and they'll choose that one. And the diver will continue to descend. Now, they don't get this hatch effect because they don't have at least 1 fish here, so the diver continues down to the midnight zone, where if they had at least 1 fish, they could move 1 of their young or 1 school. That's not the case, though. So finally, their diver reaches the bottom, where they do get a young or school movement, and they'll move this young over there. All right, now we get to go, and I think I'd like more cards. We do have 4 cards already, but I don't necessarily love their effects for our current position. I think let's dive on the blue column and get some more cards. Here, we'll draw 1 randomly because we have at least 1 fish in that section. Then we don't have an if activated effect here. And as we continue down, here we don't get an effect from the twilight zone. So maybe this wasn't the best option, but I do like getting more cards. So we can continue down further to the midnight zone, and we will draw a random card for that. So we can grab that. And then finally, when we reach the bottom, this lets us take a card from our discard pile, but we don't have a discard pile just yet. That means we can simply draw another card from the top of the draw pile. So we drew 3 cards total, and let's take a quick look at them. The Striped Marlin is pretty cheap to play, and it has a game end effect that says, before we move into final scoring, we could take any fish from our hand and place it into a sunlit zone space. We do have to pay the cost for that, but it's essentially a free action right before we move into endgame scoring. Next up, the Black Cardinal Fish is more expensive, and when played, you can hatch 2 eggs and then get 1 movement. That's pretty nice. Then we have the Wolf Trap Angler. It's pretty cheap to play, and when it's activated, we can move a young or a school. That flexibility seems really great. Okay, we're done with our turn, which means Teal can go with their gigantic hand of cards. It's not too surprising to see them play a fish from their hand, and they're going to go with the Giant Devil Ray. This is going to cost 1 card, 1 egg, and 1 young. They're going to discard this tripod fish for the second time this game. Then they'll discard that egg, and they only have 1 young, so they have to remove that one. Now they can place the Giant Devil Ray into any of the zones and into any of the columns, and they want to go here in the Twilight Zone. Now there's the When Played effect, which lets them put 2 young tokens down onto any fish or open spot, and they're going to put them here on the Showy Bristlemouth. All right, Teal is done, which means the gold player can go, and they are going to play this Mandarin fish. Its cost is a single card, and they only have 1 card in their hand, so they'll discard this longfin batfish, and then they have to play the Mandarin fish into the sunlit zone, but it can go into any of the columns. They do want to place this in the purple or blue columns, that way they unlock a zone benefit when they dive there. And they are tempted to go into the blue column, which is all about card draw, but they're about to draw 3 random cards from this When Played effect. So I think they're going to put this over here into the purple column, which is all about gaining eggs. After that, they draw 3 random cards and place 1 egg. So these are their cards, and they'll put this egg on their Catalina Goby. Okay, they are done, which means we can go, and this is our second to last action of the week. I think let's play another card from our hand, and let's go with this Black Cardinal Fish. We do have to discard a card from our hand as part of the payment, and I think we'll discard the Striped Marlin. Then we do have to pay 2 eggs, and I think it will be these 2. Now, paying this egg might not seem like a good idea because, of course, if we leave this here and then hatch it, that will turn into a school. And schools are worth 6 points at the end of the game as opposed to 1 each for the young. The reason I don't want to do this yet is because at the end of this week, which is coming soon, everyone is going to gain 1 point for every egg and or young they have. So if we create a school, then those young will turn into a school and we won't score points for them right now. At the end of the 3rd week, we'll score 2 points for every school that we have. So focusing on making schools later on in the game is a better idea. So let's avoid making a school at this moment. We'll spend those 2 eggs, and then this Black Cardinal Fish can go into any column in the sunlit or twilight zones. I would love to put this into the midnight zone here, but that's not legal for the card. Let's put it here in the green column. Now the When Played effect lets us hatch twice and move 1 young or school. We only have 2 eggs, so let's hatch both of them, and then let's move this young over there. All right, we are done. And now Teal can go. They are going to discover another fish, playing 1 from their hand, and they'll go with a yellow boxfish. The cost for this is discarding 2 cards, and they'll go with the haddock and the large-tooth flounder. The yellow boxfish has to go into the sunlit zone in any of the columns, and I think they'll put it here. Okay, they're done, which means the gold player gets to go, and they're going to play a fish from their hand. They're going to go with the barramundi. That will cost them 1 egg and 1 young, and they'll pay these. Then the fish has to go into the sunlit zone, specifically in the purple column. They'll put it here. That has an if activated action, so they don't do anything more, and they're done. All right, this is our last action of the round, and I think let's dive down the purple column again. Up here, we will gain 1 egg, and we can put that onto the porkfish. Then we descend to the porkfish, where we will gain 1 egg, and we can put that onto the Showy Bristlemouth. Then at the Twilight Zone, we'll get another egg, and we can put that up here onto this Patagonian toothfish. And that is going to be it for us. We don't have at least 1 fish in the Midnight Zone, so we don't get that. And we've already activated this column before, so we don't get this effect again. Well, that finishes our turn, and we're done for the week, which means Teal can go, and they are also going to dive down the purple column. They have at least 1 fish here, so they'll gain 1 egg. They'll put that on the yellow boxfish. Then they will descend to the yellow boxfish, and this says, if activated, all players can move one young or school. Now, teal only has young here, and they don't really want to move them yet, so they're actually going to forego this effect. They mostly put this out here to activate this zone to gain that egg. Later on, I'm sure they'll be happy they have this. Now, the rest of us can also move one young or school, but I don't think any of us really want to at this moment. It's still early in the game, where we don't have that many young in order to make those schools. I guess we do have 4, and we're actively trying not to make schools before the end of this first week. So let's come back here, and green continues to descend. That is going to get them another egg. They'll put this one onto their white-banded triggerfish. Then they get nothing for their midnight zone, and then finally they gain 1 egg for that once per week bonus, which they'll put onto their giant devil ray. All right, they're done, which means gold can take their last turn of the round, and just like the rest of us, they're going to dive down the purple column. That's not too surprising considering this makes eggs, and we're about to score for those eggs. Now, I will describe this in more detail very soon, but I do want to point out that you won't always get points for eggs and young at the end of the first week. You can play with a flip side with randomized rewards, but we're playing with side A for this first game. So they start in the sunlit zone, and they'll get 1 egg, which they'll put onto the barramundi. Then at the barramundi, they activate it, gaining an egg. They'll put this onto the mandarin fish. There is no activation on the mandarin fish, but once they reach their twilight zone, they'll gain another egg. They don't have to put these into the purple column, but it looks like that's what they're doing this turn. Finally, just like the rest of us, they don't have any fish in their twilight zone for their purple column. So they descend to the very bottom and gain 1 last egg, and they'll put this one onto their pygmy seahorse. Okay, they are done with their turn. And in fact, everyone has taken 6 turns in this week, so that means that the week is coming to a close. Before we move on to the next week, however, we have to score for the goal. I mentioned this before, but as you could see, at the end of week 1, we will all get 1 point for every egg and or young that we have. At the end of week 2, we'll get 2 points for every row of fish on our boards. And then at the end of week 3, we'll get 2 points for every school that we've made. After week 4, that's when we move into final scoring, which I will explain in more detail soon. Before we actually score this, I do want to show in slightly more detail the fact that there is a side A and a side B. Now, if anyone is playing the game for the first time, it recommends playing with side A, but with side B, more experienced players can shuffle up all of these goals and place them down onto these spots during setup, matching up the weak values with the tiles that are randomly placed. Then these are going to be the goals that you play with, and in addition to that, when playing on the side B, the player or players who receive the most points by scoring that specific goal will get 3 additional victory points. So on side B, you actually compete to have the most for these conditions, and of course, you're going to have a variety of different things that you're working towards at the end of each week when you play the game. For example, in this one, week 1 would get you 1 point for each of those tags that show up. So this is a position where those tags make sense. Over here, you get points for those consumed fish, which are the ones underneath your other fish. This one gets you points for your eggs. And of course, after week 4, you move into final scoring. Coming back to side A, we can now score for week 1, which is again 1 point for every egg and or young that we have. Beginning with our board, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of those. And we can log that on a score sheet that comes with the game. Over here, teal has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as well. And gold has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now again, if you're playing on the B side, the player who scored the most points or tied for the most for that condition gets 3 extra points. You could just add that to the numbers that you're writing down. In this case, pink and teal would get 3 extra points because they'd be tied for getting the most points for that goal. Of course, that's only if you're playing side B, and I've been showing you a side A game for this tutorial. After scoring achievements, everyone retrieves all of their divers. And then we rotate the first player token clockwise, so this goes to teal, and we proceed to the second week of the game. Just like week 1, we will all take 6 turns, then score this, and then once we finish 4 weeks of the game, we will go into final scoring, and let's talk about that now. The first thing that we do is activate any game end abilities on fish within our ocean in any order before we move on to scoring. And these all have a gold banner on the right side. For example, this faceless cusk specifically has to go onto the lowest spot on our boards. We can see that icon, so this isn't even legal. And if we had this faceless cusk in play at the end of the game, we would get to play 1 fish from our hand onto one of these bottommost positions, paying that cost as normal. There are many other effects that can happen. For example, this large tooth flounder in the teal player's discard puts one egg onto every one of their fish in their green column that doesn't have an egg already. And this tripod fish says they could consume 2 fish before endgame scoring, and consuming means you take a card from your hand and you tuck it underneath one of your played fish already. It is worth noting, when you consume a fish, tucking it underneath, the consumed fish does have to be shorter than the fish on top. Then we'll move into scoring. The first thing we do for this are game end points. Some of the fish that we have played gives us points if we meet certain conditions. For example, this angle shark gives you 10 points if this fish has consumed 3 fish. So that means there are 3 or more fish underneath this on your board. After we perform all of those endgame points, we will score up the points printed on our visible fish. Coming back to this angel shark, it would be worth 2 points because that's printed on the left side. Then we'll gain 1 point for every egg on our board, 1 point for every young on our board, and 6 points for every school that we have. And finally, we'll count all of the consumed fish underneath the fish that are at the top of stacks and get 1 point for each of those. After that, the player with the most points is the winner, and if there is a tie, then the tied player who has more cards in their hand will break the tie in their favor, and if there's still a tie, then those players share the victory. Well, the game is now ready to move into the second week, but I think we're done playing through the game. Up to this point, I've taught just about all of the rules to the game, and that means this tutorial is coming to a close. I hope you enjoyed learning how to play Finspan. As always, I'd like to thank everyone who's been supporting this channel, including these producer-level Patreon supporters. If you too would like to directly support the channel in the creation of future videos like this one, then please go to jongetsgames.com/support. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button for it down below, as well as the subscribe button for the channel. Thanks for watching.